All right, so we're going to talk about season 3. It was really important when we started the season to start with a couple of big ideas. First was the idea of good versus evil, this idea that our characters had free will and free choice of whether they were good or evil, and inside each one of them was the potential for each.
Right.
And the basic premise when we started talking about villains was, how do we create a situation where every single one of our characters will be forced to decide which side they were on.
And to acknowledge that every one of us has inside of us the propensity to be either good or evil. And you know, I just remember that last episode of Villains, when Sylar was on that loudspeaker talking to Claire, the idea that everyone has inside them the choice to go one way or another, and that episode really dramatized what Villains was all about.
From cheerleader to stone cold killer. Who's the monster now?
A lot of the volume for me was about our initial discussions about Peter and Sylar for the season, and what those two characters were going through specifically and represented. Peter representing the good side of the coin, Sylar representing the bad side of the coin, and what happens when you start messing with those characters. What are you going? The extremes of that, especially Sylar coming out of the first 2 episodes, which aired on the same night, knowing I'm a Petrelli brother. Is there hope for my salvation and my redemption? Can you turn our big bad into the hero, and subsequently, can we turn our hero into
something that is ultimately can be tamed? And for Sylar, it was about locating what was inside of him that he needed, what he needed to fulfill himself, you know. And for Sylar, it was family connection. And first being with the Petrelli family, and then later taking that theme and continuing it on through our next volume, Fugitives, making Sylar's quest be about finding his real family and getting in touch with it.
From where I stand, we have exactly nothing in common.
Yeah, well, we pick easy targets. Like that rabbit, weak, helpless. Not fair, really.
Are you really drawing a moral line?
Morality? Doesn't figure into it. Fish gotta swim, birds gotta fly.
The whole Sylar arc changed at that episode. And
because it was the end of his, it was sort of the end of his quest. He had spent a long time thinking about where did he come from, and how did he become who he was. And by going to see the father, it's a very archetypal thing to do. You think you're going to go to your father and he's going to give you the answers, and to get to him and he gives you no answers. Is really
gives you no answers, and yet the burning desire, the quest to fully realize yourself is still there.
This is pitiful.
What's that?
What you've become. You used to be a killer. Now look at you. You're pathetic.
Oh, you want a fight? That what you were expecting? Son kills his father. Epic battle.
Family seemed to be at the heart, and as it always is, we always seem to be going back to the idea of the families, and the big families being the Petrellis and the Bennetts. And that was another thing that we really wanted to talk about and we wanted to accomplish with Villains. Something we had talked about for a couple of seasons is trying to figure out how to find the time to introduce Arthur Petrelli. And that was a really fun idea, because we had sort of created this whole idea of who Arthur was without him being there. He literally is talked about a tremendous amount in the pilot, and shortly after that, he looms really large. He's the reason why Nathan went into politics. He's the reason why Peter sort of rebelled and became a nurse, because he had this very powerful sort of dark figure as a father. So you're really waiting to see who this guy was, and so casting became hugely important.
Him coming with such a face, you know. And bringing that darkness to the screen in such a big way was a big boon for us.
Amazing that when you put their pictures of Adrian and Milo and
Robert
Forster and Christine Rose as a mother, it was unbelievable how much like a family that really looked.
When the son challenges the father, only one is left standing. I should have one last talk with him. I owe him that.
What happens if that doesn't take?
Well, I'll kill him.
We had so many discussions about Arthur's ability
Yeah.
and who Arthur was and who this personification of evil is, especially in comparison to Peter, who Peter's the good guy and is the good son. So Peter could take all these abilities via empathy, and he just had to feel who that person was, and he didn't steal the power. But Arthur, his father, was the 1.0 version of that ability.
He was
he
a
had
pirate.
he had to take it, and he stripped it away from you.
You don't have your powers anymore, Peter, because I have them now. Hello, Angela. You can see the future. I can't have that. That's too dangerous. I understand you've been dreaming about me.
For me, it was such a big deal when we finally discovered that moment. Do you remember that moment?
We debated all morning about, like, no, this is what Arthur does, and you're like, I don't get it. How come he can't do it like Peter does, and why wouldn't he do it like Peter does? And we're like, because it's better that way. And then we went to comic books, and we came back, and we're like, no. It's version 1.0.
It's version 1.0, but the fact is that it's an evolution of Peter's ability. And Peter, by the way, always had it in him to do exactly what Arthur did. Always had it in him to steal. But Peter chose the lightness rather than the villainy. Well, and it went back to the theme of the volume, which was incredibly important.
And the idea of that family, because the idea of that family was always, and I've said this before, was always sort of loosely based on these big dynasty families of sort of the Kennedys, or even the Corleone family is actually a better example of it, of the son who's trying to be legitimate where the father wasn't. And Arthur Petrelli made all kinds of sort of pacts with the devil in his life.
He was